Hello, everyone. My name is Anne Marie Dixon, and I'm coming to you from Nashua, New Hampshire, where not only did we receive a lot of snow this past week, but it is also home to Boston Center. So if you're ever flying across the country, particularly in the Northeast, you would be speaking to a controller at Boston Center, which is actually located in Nashua, New Hampshire. So for the past few years, I have been a contractor for the FAA, and I worked in the Thomas P. Stafford building at the Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center there in Oklahoma City. I'm very ashamed to admit that I was sitting next to Thomas Stafford's artifacts and many, many amazing things about his life. I ate lunch next to those artifacts for 3 years, but I didn't take notice. I had heard about his Air and Space Museum out in Weatherford many times, but I kind of doubted that it would be able to top the Smithsonian or anything like that. But I made the trek out there and I was absolutely blown away. It was an incredible, incredible museum. And I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to finally appreciate Thomas Stafford's life, as well as all of the amazing and incredible things that he has contributed to aerospace, as well as to the state of Oklahoma. So this is the Stafford building at the FAA's Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center. So you can see a couple of the glass cases that housed a lot of his trinkets and uniforms, and you name it. There was mugs and ID tags and all kinds of fun stuff. You can kind of see in the background where this is where I would sit and eat my lunch every day. And sadly, I never paid attention. So I do regret that I didn't take more notice, but I'm so glad that I finally got the opportunity to visit the Thomas P. Stafford Air and Space Museum. So I arrived at the facility at his museum on a nice quiet Sunday and was welcomed by the staff, particularly a young kid named Zach. He is their IT professional and installer. So his main interest was IT, but having worked there for the last couple of years, he also developed a really broad knowledge base of the museum and was able to give me an incredible tour. So I was very appreciative of his efforts in sharing with me so many interesting and neat little details that probably most visitors don't get to be a part of. But one of the things that I found that was incredibly interesting was that Oklahoma is very well known for its astronauts and those that participated in the space program. Oklahoma is actually the only state to have an astronaut fly in every American manned space program: Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, and even in the International Space Station. And of the 31 total missions flown during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, 1 out of every 3 had an Oklahoma astronaut on board. How cool is that? So as I got to tour the museum, I went into the women's restroom, which was impeccably clean, by the way. And even the restroom was in memorabilia in honor of female aviators and astronauts. So these were a couple of the pictures that were actually in the women's restroom. They were of the wasps and the waves, and there was placards next to each one of them describing what each picture contained. So it was a very neat tribute to see, for sure. So while I love airplanes almost as much as my children probably, the part that fascinated me the most was Thomas Stafford's life. He was an incredible overachiever, ridiculous overachiever, like makes even the most ambitious person look lazy. But it was truly a fascinating journey through his life there at the museum. So um, Thomas Stafford was born in 1930, and from a young age, he was an only child to Mary Patton Stafford and Dr. Thomas Stafford, who was a dentist. They had him a little bit later in life, so they were able to devote a lot of attention to him. And they also devoted a lot of attention to his education. It was very important to them. So his mother felt that he was intellectually gifted and cultivated his love of reading, while his father taught him geography and history. And you can see here in the picture, this was the actual globe that his father would teach him, excuse me, about geography. So Thomas actually, he showed a very large aptitude for math, and he was known as the human slide rule. So they have his slide rule that he used in high school. Apparently he took this on to his space missions as well. But he was known as the human slide rule, not anything that I've ever excelled in, but definitely a precursor to his future endeavors. So not surprisingly, he was also an Eagle Scout, and he also excelled as a star athlete. He was on the Weatherford High School football team, and he also talked the coach into creating a wrestling team. So he was actually offered he was recruited by the University of Oklahoma to play football for them and received a Navy ROTC scholarship to attend as well. But Stafford really wanted to push himself mentally and physically. So he decided that he would apply to go to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. He was accepted, and he set out in 1948. He graduated high school, and he left to go to Annapolis to begin his college career at the Naval Academy. He was going to play football there, but he ended up getting an injury, and so was able to really just focus on his studies. Now, from a very early age, he loved flying. He would spend a lot of time at the Weatherford Airport watching all the military trainers fly in and out. And at the age of 14, he actually got to fly in a Piper Cub. And that sparked his interest in flying. From that point forward, he was determined that he would be a pilot someday. But he knew that only the pilots were only selected out of the top 25% of their graduating class. So he knew that he had to do really well. He didn't want to just fly. He wanted to fly the hottest, fastest, and highest flying aircraft out there. So he pushed himself and graduated in the top 3% of his class. So back then, the Air Force was the new Air Force. They were born in September 18th of 1948, and they did not yet have their own military academy. So the graduates of the Naval Academy were allowed the opportunity, if they graduated in the top of their class, that they could stay in the Air Force, or they could they could stay in the Navy or transfer to the Air Force. So Thomas chose very wisely, and he aimed high, and he joined the Air Force because he really wanted to be a fighter pilot. He didn't want to fly all these slow bombers and things like that around. And he would later become the first member of his Naval Academy class to reach the rank of general. So in 1952, after graduating from the Naval Academy, he set off to pilot training, where he flew the Texan T-6, an old World War II prop plane. And for the next 6 years, he would continue on and fly various airplanes. But he completed his flight training on September 1st of 1953. And 3 days later, he literally married the girl next door from Weatherford, Oklahoma. Her name was Faye Shoemaker, and they went on to have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. So after 6 years of flying around in his slow airplanes, he decided that he wanted to pursue his Mecca. And so he applied to go to the Experimental Flight Test Pilot School to be a test pilot. And he was quoted by saying he wanted to fly higher and faster than anyone else is an ultimate goal. So not surprisingly, he graduated first out of 16 in his class. He became a test pilot instructor and ended up co-authoring 2 books on aerodynamics and flight test methodology. And even after 60 years of aviation, of creation, his books are still utilized today. So he did that for a few years, got to fly around as a test pilot. And as he was pondering his future in 1962, he decided that he wanted to apply for a business degree. Why not go to Harvard? And he wanted to be an astronaut. So he applied for the NASA astronaut program as well. Well, he was chosen for both. So he decided that the NASA program was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so he set out to join the ranks of some of the first astronauts in space. So here, this is one of his Earth orbit maps, which I just thought was pretty cool. And obviously, flying was Stafford's first love, but the prospect of space only propelled his affections. So in September of 1962, he was brought on with NASA, where he was crew on the manned missions of the Gemini 6A, the Gemini 9, and the Apollo 10. So these were just a few of the artifacts that were there. This is the Titan rocket. And this Titan rocket was used in the Gemini 6 as well as the Gemini 9 mission. And this over here was a gigantic nuclear warhead that could be attached to the top of the Titan. And this particular warhead had the power of 600 Hiroshima bombs. They never had to use it, but they did have that capability to attach that over here to the top. So over here, they had a replica of the capsule for which they would re-enter into the atmosphere. And this whole side would be burned, and hopefully the astronauts would land in the water and be taken out safely. But this was just a replica, but this particular rocket, the Titan rocket, was actually a real rocket that was used in the space programs. So that was a neat little artifact that they had available for them. So a couple of fun facts about his missions was that in the Gemini 6A module, this particular one that was flown in space, it was the very first rendezvous in space with another aircraft. So the Gemini 6 and the Gemini 7 took off at the same time, and they actually ended up docking together in space. And that happened in December of 1965. So we're coming up on that anniversary, but they were the first to dock in space. During the Apollo 10 mission, Stafford and his crew set the human speed record, going 25,000 miles an hour. That's pretty insane. So he not only had accomplishments on the ground, but he had some major accomplishments in space. His last space mission was probably the most noteworthy, though, and that was the Apollo-Soyuz test project. So before we got over to the area that had all the artifacts from the Apollo-Soyuz test project, I was shown by Zach, our our tour guide, that this particular module, this was the exact replica that was built for the Apollo 11 movie with Tom Hanks in it. The director wanted to make sure that every detail was exact. And so they were able to get this from the set of the Apollo 11 movie. You can see Santa's hanging off, but one of the things that was pretty neat, what I thought it was an interesting fact that probably only Zach really was able to share with me, as he had installed this. This was a new docking station that was attached to the replica, and it was actually made out of a 3D printer. It was incredible to see how detailed that this docking port was. But he had just finished installing it, and apparently it cost a lot of money. So he was nervous to make sure that it was installed properly. So I also got a shot of my little man here. He was able to join me, and he had a great time at the museum as well. They had really a lot of great things for the kids as well. So they had a big room full of this gigantic project. It was an international effort, the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And this was really an unprecedented event, in my opinion, because we were very much in the heart of the Cold War during this time. And so in 1972, the cosmonauts, the NASA and the cosmonauts, they decided that they wanted to do this international space mission. And so they worked together to learn each other's languages, as well as coordinating the event that would take place so that they could dock together and that they can conduct experiments in space together. And so it took them almost 3 years to learn and to research and figure out and plan how they were going to come together for this event. But shortly before this project, Stafford, who was still considered to be in the Air Force, he was promoted to Brigadier General, and he was named the commander for this international mission. This also would be his last mission in space. But on a good note, it was not to sound that it was going to be a bad thing. This was just his chosen last mission, and not a bad way to go out. So on July 15th in 1975, the Apollo launched, and a few hours later, the Soyuz blasted off for their meeting up in space. Now, our mission, the U.S.'s mission, was commanded by Thomas P. Stafford himself, while the Russian Soyuz was commanded by someone that we have discussed in our history lectures as Alexei, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Alexei Leonov. Well, he was one of the first cosmonauts that was in space, and so it was quite natural that he got to be a part of this mission as well. And so the most famous of the pictures is of Stafford and Leonov. They are shaking hands in space as they were able to dock together. So they took off on July 15th. On July 17th, the two spacecraft docked together where the crews could meet, and they conducted joint experiments and naturally held a bunch of press conferences, because this was a pretty big deal, for the next 44 hours. So what was really neat to see was that Stafford had a lot of tributes to his friend Leonov. They became close friends, working together jointly with this project for the few years. And so they later became hunting buddies and were able to spend quite a bit of time together prior to Leonov's death a few years ago. But throughout the whole museum, there was a lot of contributions, a lot of tributes to Leonov and to the cosmonauts of the Russian space programs. So later that year, because Stafford, he apparently 1975 was a big year for him, but he couldn't just leave the space program and not do anything else. So naturally, in November of that year, 1975, Stafford became the commander of the Air Force's Flight Test Center, his former alma mater. So he moved out to Edwards Air Force Base, and he was in charge of and oversaw both the Air Force and the NASA facilities where they were testing, and was even in charge of Area 51, which I thought was pretty neat. So he did that for 3 more years, and in 1978, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and became the Deputy Chief of Staff of Research and Development and Acquisition in DC. So during this time, he was instrumental in the development of the Advanced Technology Bombers, which would be kind of the precursor to the B-2 stealth bomber. And so he was quite instrumental in that committee. So in 1979, he decided that he would finally retire. I don't think he has really retired, but only in name only. However, he has continued to serve on several corporate boards, including Gulfstream Aerospace. And in the 1990s, he was an advisor to NASA on their long-term planning for lunar missions. So all in all, he logged 507 hours in space and flew over 130 aircraft during his career. So I'm pretty sure it's safe to say he is unmatched in achievement and drive. So, but from the frontier to the plains to the final frontier, Thomas P. Stafford was the ultimate aviator. Despite all that he's achieved, he credited his parents for instilling their values in him. You can see down here, he even won the Space Medal of Honor. One of the things that he was most proud to speak of is the fact that his mother came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon and lived long enough to see her son go up into space. That is incredible feat. The Thomas P. Stafford Air and Space Museum is continuing to expand. They have a large expansion project that is happening right now, but it is an amazing, amazing place to be able to visit. His legacy is going to be able to live on for the next generation of aviators and enthusiasts, and is truly a gift to Oklahoma and to the aviation world. It's a gift and a tribute to his dedication of service, and as a gift to all the original test pilots out there before him.